The Legend of Zelda franchise holds numerous entries that are often regarded as many of Nintendo's greatest achievements. To many players such as ourselves, the franchise can be seen as nostalgic, or seen as an icon with the gaming community. However, there is one Zelda game that people tend to not appreciate these days, like, at all. Well, not as much as the more popular games, if you know what I mean. Well, sure, it might not be as iconic as them, but hell, I mean, the second alternate world experience is just insanely underrated. So essentially, this video will explain why this Legend of Zelda game is super underappreciated, or even how it still manages to be an incredibly unique entry for the Game Boy Advance. As always, if you love any form of Nintendo content at all, please be sure to check out the channel along with all the links and timestamps down below. Also, be sure to keep watching towards the end of the video, because you might actually like this type of content. But anyways, to this day, the game itself is a bit unrecognized. However, it turned out to be an outstanding continuation of the Zelda franchise after both the Wind Waker and, of course, the Four Swords Adventures. And obviously, the Minish Cap isn't as noticeable as something like Ocarina of Time. However, the game's distinct features that players tend to notice when playing, such as the overworld or Link's unique abilities, have been somewhat overlooked. And the game surprisingly retains the same nostalgic yet retro-like music that sounds pretty catchy on the Game Boy Advance. The gameplay is also as iconic as A Link to the Past, one of the greatest Nintendo games ever made, and honestly makes this game that one best kept secret Zelda game, which is a good thing. And though the Minish Cap was highly reviewed, the thing is, no one played this game. Like, no one. I mean, I might as well have named the video Underplayed instead of Underappreciated, despite it being one of the best selling Game Boy Advance titles. But who knows, maybe you're one of those, oh yeah, I totally forgot about that game type of guys, but yeah, I couldn't blame you. Now, if it's the one single downside to this game, it wouldn't be Link's size, no pun intended, but rather the game's extremely short playthrough, which really sucked. And this was due to the release of the Nintendo DS in the same exact month of this game coming out, which seriously affected the game's sales. Fortunately enough, I played this game for a very small amount when I was younger, and eventually returned to it many years later. And fans of the series could even see how distinctive the storyline was at the time, compared to a few of the other Zelda entries. However, it seems the storyline might have been somewhat boring to some players at first, but as they progressed throughout the game, it got way more intriguing and way less generic. So I guess what really went wrong with the Minish Cap was nothing really. The game was essentially underplayed, even though it was highly received among players and critics at the time. But hey, as long as people had fun with the many puzzles to solve, along with exploring a few of the unique parts of the game, is really all that matters. Another short topic I'll talk about in a second would have to be the game's world structure, or in short, a few of the game's well-designed areas/locations. But anyways, due to the variations of the different types of enemies between both Big and Mini Link, just gave the game's creators a whole new opportunity to create a more interesting game experience. Now, the way many parts of the game is designed just seems to make everyone's playthrough loads of more fun. I mean, let's face it, the Minish Cap wouldn't exactly be as enjoyable if most parts of the game were just you constantly fighting the same enemies or even interacting with the same characters. Instead, they use Link's fresh new cat named Ezlo to essentially create a brand new experience for both new and returning players alike. And the game's 2D Zelda dungeon design, meaning their different details and aspects within them, truly suits the theme of the game. And the one thing I personally loved about the game was exactly how Link's size-changing ability allowed the game to feature a handful of enemies that you wouldn't necessarily see in the overworld. And players along with myself have honestly grown to favor the different textures and small details within the dungeons themselves. Now, if it's a single thing that most Zelda games have, it would truly have to be its thrilling gameplay and exploration. For starters, a game like Breath of the Wild might always keep you entertained due to having the largest open world experience in the Zelda franchise by a long shot. Who woulda knew? Anyways, as for the Minish Cap, just the simple fact alone that there is one key point of the game, which was how early the introduction was to the world of the Minish, and in general was just a remarkable moment in the game. And having to play through two entirely different points of view to experience the game was very unique in its own way. And switching between both versions of Link was very satisfying for numerous reasons. For example, if there are certain objects in your path, such as rocks or even small bodies of water, the player can easily traverse them without any effort at all. Oh, and the small doorway/mini Link entrances all across the game are an ingenious aspect of the Minish World experience, which in a way forces you to figure out how you can advance to the next area. The side questing aspect of the game is a minor but nonetheless enjoyable small addition that was added to the Minish Cap, although the appearance of side quests are mainly featured in Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild. However, the length of the game has been somewhat frowned upon, and turns out was sadly the most criticized aspect about the game. I mean, personally, I'd say it was the game's storyline, which in all honesty wasn't that bad. But besides the Zelda game's common bombs and arrows, the Minish Cap featured 3 new usable items. The Mole Mitts, which allow Link to dig through earthen walls, the Gust Jar that's basically used to suck up enemies and objects, and the Cane of Pachi that allows Link to flip objects upside down. And to this day, I still have no idea how to pronounce that item. However, all 3 items provided are mostly situational. Nonetheless, they've been proven to be quite useful in their own way. Not to mention the game's more updated inventory system, which players loved. And the game is said to take place between Skyward Sword and the original 4 Swords for the GameCube, which is the sequel to the Minish Cap. And all 3 games take place during the early history of the Zelda timeline. One last extremely short topic that I feel I should probably mention would be the game's mysterious kinstones. Oh man, these things were something else. This idea, that a handful of players hated, was truly infuriating. So I'll tell you what, I'll try to give you a half-assed explanation in about 20 seconds or so. So essentially there's 4 different colors and about 2 to 3 numerous shapes of kinstones, all of which are used to unlock treasure. They're either randomly dropped throughout the game and can be obtained by killing enemies or being found in grass. However, these scarce red kinstones, which are mainly found in chests, hold the best rewards / items. Well, I don't think that was such a bad interpretation, right? When you think of your typical Zelda enemy, you'd probably end up thinking of one of these guys, or maybe even one of these. Now sure, there's a few of your usual common Zelda enemies, but this game just possessed a whole new variety of different enemies due to the game's alternate world experience, which in general just allowed a ton of never seen before enemies and NPCs to be added to the Minish Cap, and certain previous 2D Zelda entries rarely possessed any memorable characters at all. I suppose you can sort of think of it as a certain Pokemon game where you might end up remembering some familiar characters, kinda like that one P-Brain rival that everyone seems to hate. But nonetheless, a handful of NPCs within the Minish Cap are either great to interact with or can be just straight up forgettable. But then again, I suppose it could be the fact that a large majority of the characters within the game all have their own style, or instead their own distinctive appearance, if you will. But anyways, back to the more important side of this would be the enemies in the Minish Cap, and exactly how they differentiated from the more notable enemies in the franchise. And of course, there are multiple recurring enemies that you'd probably expect to be in this game, including enemies like the Rollabite, Matterpillar, the different variations of the Beetles, or even all the other miscellaneous enemies that certainly suit a Zelda game like never before. Now at the time, I loved this game's graphics and visual design. I mean, to me, I honestly saw it as a bit of a step up from Link's Awakening, or maybe the Oracle games or something. The game might have been released in late 2004, so obviously many games' graphics were severely improved around that time period. So this game really didn't possess anything insane, but during the middle stages of the Game Boy Advance, the graphics weren't that far ahead, but they were pretty sweet to experience, along with a few of the game's animations that were quite enjoyable to look at for the time being. However, the Minish World design was, in my opinion, just far more appealing than the overworld. The classic 2D retro art style just fits so well with the colors of the game, and the design of numerous environments within the Minish Cap just made a returning Zelda player feel right at home. So, the Minish Woods and Mount Cornell are introduced pretty early in the game, and they're both 2 of the most beautifully designed regions included in the Minish Cap, as well as their dungeons. And when delving into the game's dungeons, most of them were different, having unique aspects and enjoyable puzzles that players would need to solve in order to move to the next area, similar to the overworld. The Zelda games are, well, many of gaming's most successful accomplishments. Now, I wouldn't say that for the Minish Cap, however. I mean, honestly, I loved this game when I got the chance to play it, but unfortunately the franchise has far better alternatives that players tend to appreciate instead. And of course, it's a phenomenal handheld Zelda entry that is straight up severely underappreciated / underrated in general. But the game's extensive additions, along with the game's natural comfortability, or even its incredibly suited theme, just goes to show that the Minish Cap is definitely a hidden gem within the franchise. And like most classics back then, if you ever have the time to play games like this, do take the time because it's absolutely worth the experience. Regardless of this video, the Minish Cap will always remain as one of the greatest, most unnoticed handheld games in my opinion. And yeah, I'm fully aware that my upload schedule has been atrocious, but my next video might be on the new wave Mario Kart tracks that just came out like, what, over 2 weeks ago already? But also, I've decided to work on multiple videos simultaneously, resulting in more frequent scuffed Nintendo content. I do somewhat enjoy making slightly longer videos like this, and I really hope you enjoyed this long planned video, as this channel desperately needs some more Donkey Kong and Zelda content. As always, if you made it this far, you might as well check out the other videos and such within the channel. Also, be sure to like this video, and please be sure to follow and check out all that stuff down below. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video and all that. Please sub to the channel already, and I'll see you next time. Peace!